We're here today with Suzie Vinnick, originally from Saskatoon. She's traveled the world and done such amazing things, and we're going to go back and talk about all your achievements and and look back at your childhood roots. So let's start with what's your beginnings with music in general? Elementary school?
Yeah, I went to George Vanier Catholic School in the Avalon area, Saskatoon, and I had, even before then, I had friends, like neighborhood friends that I used to hang out with, and my brother took guitar lessons. He's 7 years older than me, so I guess as a little kid, even before elementary school, I saw possibilities with music around me. Auntie had a piano, and Doug's dad had a saxophone. It might have been his grandpa's, I forget. Anyway, and I see all these possibilities, and then Doug and I, we used to hang out. I was a tomboy as a kid, so played around, and we talked about starting a band. I don't exactly know why, but we were 9, so. And Doug didn't play anything. I didn't play anything yet, but I loved music, so I was totally into it. And my brother took guitar lessons, so there was a guitar kicking around. He wasn't taking them anymore. So I asked Mom if I could take guitar lessons. I don't remember if I said, well, you're going to have a band or not. But anyway, started taking guitar lessons at the Saskatoon Guitar College up at Clarence and 8th Street. And my first teacher was a lady named Lynn McKinnon. I don't know if she's even around Saskatoon anymore, but thank you, Lynn. And I took to it like a fish to water. I really loved music, so I took lessons from her for, I think, about a year, and then she said, I have nothing more to teach you. I kind of learned everything I could from her, so I had a couple of other teachers, and I'm going to say Kenton Remenda, something like that. And then, yeah, I got into, in grade school, I got involved in the band program, so I picked up saxophone at 11, and played in the school band, and was learning guitar at the same time. And then in high school, I went to Holy Cross High School. Or is that too fast? Going there too fast. All good. And in grade 9, I was going to play guitar. Oh, I also was in the Lions band, that's right. Karen Kawalenko-Evian was the director at the time, so they had a concert band and the jazz band, and I played saxophone in the concert band, and I played guitar, I think, or did I play saxophone? Gosh, there's like so much, it's all coming together, all the different things.
Were you singing already at this time?
When I learned how to play chords on the guitar, I started learning how to, to make the chords come together in like a singing Country Roads, John Denver.
Yeah. Did you have sort of a musical direction early on that you were catering to?
I went to a lot of the stuff that I'd hear on the radio. In my mom and dad's house, they had CFQC radio was on all the time. In the card with Dad, it would be say JWW. Country music, and I didn't like the country music, so we'd always say, Dad, shut the radio off, and sometimes we just listened to it. So I liked kind of the classic rock and stuff that I was familiar with, so when I was learning songs on guitar, and it was great at the school, they'd give us lyric sheets with the chords about them, so I could take stuff home and learn how to play it. And then my mom was really sweet and would take me quite often to Collier Music House. And it's, I think, did it used to be on 19th, I think?
I think maybe it was around 2nd Avenue.
Or 2nd Avenue, well that was the later.
Oh,
that was the later. It was in another location, and then they moved, I think. Or maybe it was always there. Anyway, no matter.
Do you remember the first record you ever bought?
The one that kind of was of bigger significance was Breakfast in America by Supertramp. I'd heard the Logical song on the radio and really liked it. And I don't know why, as an 11-year-old, it kind of resonated with me, but there was something about it. And saved up my babysitting pennies and went to Sears, bought it.
Very cool. And listening to the radio, is that something you said that the family had the radio on, but is that something that you would sit in your room later?
Yeah, I'd listen to a lot to C95 at FM 103, Saskatoon's best rock in stereo, or something like that. I think was maybe so. So I think FM 103 maybe eventually turned to C95, and so I'd listen to that. And there were some great programs that kind of showcased different music. My brother loved music, and he always listened to it. And he's 7 years older than me, and he had kind of an interesting record collection. He had a friend that would give him records that he didn't want to listen to. So some of it was quite an eclectic collection, and a lot of bands that weren't necessarily mainstream, but some great music. I can't even remember. I want to say not Men Without Hats, Men at Work, and there was another band, but there's just a bunch. So if he didn't care for records, he kind of passed them on to me, and he had a box of 45s that he didn't want anymore. So that's something that I'd like to do at some point, is do a project called the Box of 45s and just go back to that box. I threw it out. I don't know what I was thinking. When I was in my early teens, I was purging stuff or something, and I had this great little box full of 45s, which would have been the coolest thing to go back to. I still regret it. I got to get over it. But it was all the hits from the 70s, and Elton John was in there, and a whole mess of stuff. So I'd say my musical tastes were pretty mainstream, and then getting into the jazz music through stage band and concert music, as the concert band music, it kind of exposed me to a lot of different material. So I appreciated a lot of different styles. Unfortunately, not country initially. Old country, which is something I've totally grown to love in my older years. Whatever.
Were you in the band program all through high school?
Yes. I went from Vanier to Holy Cross, and I played saxophone in concert band, a wind ensemble, saxophone quartet, played bass in the stage band, jazz combo, and we did a lot of the music festivals and
So had you learned the bass at all on your own before just joining the school band?
No, I picked up bass in grade 9. There was no bass player, but there was myself and Kevin Colo, who's the other guitar player, and he kind of knew more of the jazzier chords. I was kind of more of the folkier shaped chords, and there was no bass player, and there was a bass, and I said to Mr. England, who's the music director at the time, could I learn how to play bass? Can I teach myself? And he was, yeah, go ahead. So that was the beginning. So I never had any lessons on the instrument. I had to learn how to read the cape, the clef and bass clef, and I could read very minor. Well, I mean, because I played the concert band through grade school, so so it's just all the hours I put in with the bands in high school, and I think all the listening I did too.
And so then you're practicing at home. Did that shift where you were playing bass more?
No, the bass practicing was more at high school, because we'd stay after school with the jazz combo, and I think the stage band was 3 noon hours a week, and the jazz combo was 1 or 2 days after school. So I got a lot of hours in just through school on the bass. Guitar, it was at home. When I was about 13, I started taking lessons with a guitarist that I met through HEL Music named John Mayer. He'd studied down in Hollywood at Guitar Institute, and we got along. It was pretty cool. I mean, he was a lot older than me, but I started taking lessons from him, and I always laugh, and he shared this story at a show I did a few years ago about how he'd given me a bunch of music he plunked music in front of me just to see where my abilities were at, and I was reading everything really fast. It was good that way. I was getting the language, and so I think I kind of put him on his toes a little bit, because he had to work a bit more. So, but we ended up playing music together briefly in a band, a 4-piece band, and then took it on the road as a duo called the Sultans. So I was in high school, and then some weekends I'd go off with John and play small town Saskatchewan bars, smoky bars, and play cover tunes in them.
Were you both singing lead?
Yeah, we both sang lead on tunes, and I played bass in that project, and he played guitar, and then we had a drum machine.
Yeah. Did you do any other solo work in high school years?
I didn't really get into going out and doing solo voice and guitar
shows or anything like that.
Variety show. I think I did 1 or 2 songs in high school, but it was kind of more after getting into blues jams. And I shouldn't say that though, because when I was about 15, there used to be a jam at the Rose and Crown, which no longer exists, but it was across from Sturdy Stone Center, and I played music briefly with Keith Reed and Tim Coolican. Tim's grandparents lived next door to my mom and dad's house, so we were friends since we were little. And he was a drummer. And I'm not sure how the 3 of us all connected. Maybe it's probably through Tim. And so Tim and Keith and I would go to these open stages at the Rose and Crown. I'm guessing I was about 15, and playing bass, and laid my first Jimi Hendrix tune, Hey Joe. And we'd go every Saturday, and one of my good friend's brothers played guitar and I loved Heart. Heart was one of my favorite bands. Ann Wilson, amazing singer, and Nancy Wilson on guitar, which was inspiring to me as a guitarist. So my friend's brother, Terry Lemke, knew Dog and Butterfly. So I often got up on Saturdays after maybe if Tim and Keith weren't at the jam or the open stage, and Terry would accompany me on the song. I'd be terrified. I'd be butterflies in the bathroom, and then I'd sing, and then I'd just feel really stoked for the next week. It would just give me this great energy. So I knew something that made me happy and a little adrenaline rush. So
how old do you think you were when you first realized this is going to be my career?
33. No, I mean, I never, it's weird. It was sort of music. I had to be doing music. It's just kind of like drinking water and sleeping. It wasn't sort of, I'm going to be a professional musician when I grew up. I don't even know if I knew what the concept of being a professional musician was, or even had any understanding of that. I just knew I really liked music and how it made me feel. So I did consider going to university. Well, I did go to university in Saskatchewan for about a minute, but just one year. But I had applied, actually. I looked into going down to the school in Hollywood, but it was so far away, and I was so young. And same with, I did apply to Humber College in Toronto and had an audition and never followed through, and looked into Grant MacEwan in Edmonton, which wasn't that far, and Vancouver, but none of that ever happened. I ended up just doing a lot of playing.
When did the songwriting start?
I think I wrote my first song called Life is Dull when I was probably 11. It was very short and sweet. But no, seriously, later in my teens, I think I started digging in a bit more.
And so what would be the kind of the musical influence for those early songs you were writing?
Well, I mean, Supertramp would have wheedled its way in there, and Heart, but I think Rickie Lee Jones was a big one for me. I really got into her music in my late teens. Loved her singing and her songwriting, great stories, and it was musical, and I think it also was pretty contemporary, but it dabbled its toes a bit in the jazz idiom. It was just a little more sophisticated, and so I think having played jazz all through my high school years, it was something that really appealed to me. And
you landed up being on CityWorks 88.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that. Who was the band?
Oh, good question. God, I feel terrible because I don't know if I'm going to remember who actually played on my demo, but I know that.
So it was somebody who you just threw something together for that session.
Yeah, or John Mayer played guitar when we did the session for the album. Yeah, I'd have to look at the credits. Yeah, I was probably 17 when I wrote that song. And I kind of submitted to the contest on a whim. I just thought I'll give it a try, and then ended up making it, which was pretty cool. And yeah, and I think we did that out at, what was the recording studio way out of town? Studio
West?
Yeah, I think we tracked at Studio West. And I'm so sorry, I can't remember. I'd have to look at the record to see who was on it, but yeah, it was cool to get on that collection of tunes. And
Was that your first recording?
I did. I won a contest through Buds on Broadway, because when the Rose and Crown, it actually burnt down, and so I started going to open stages of the jam at Buds, and I didn't know anything about blues, but I went every Saturday and connected with people there and started learning a bit about it. And they had a contest that you could win some free recording time, which was awesome. So that was at Audio Art, and I was there, just thinking back, 16 or 17. I don't know if all these timelines are lining up, but they're close. Yeah, and I did a demo of a song there, and Big Dave McLean joined me on it. I asked if he would come play, because I'd met him at the jams, and he was very sweet, and came over with his steel guitar and played on my tunes. And my brother got some great pictures of the session, a couple of shots of Dave and I. So yeah, and so that was probably one of my first times in the studio, and then the Studio West thing for City Works, and then I had a friend that was taking a recording course, or someone I'd met through the jam, I think, and so they invited myself and a few other musicians that I jam with to come and track some tunes. So, a bit of experience, and then I also did some jingle work too. So,
let's talk about Buds for a couple minutes here.
Sure.
So, you would go to the jam regularly. At that point, you're playing bass all the time.
Yeah,
Did
the
you
jams.
sing when you got up? Were you the lead singer and people joined you, or were you just playing along with anyone?
I think initially I played along, because I can remember standing and watching somebody singing and playing bass and thinking, that's impossible to do. So I suspect that if I got up to sing, I wasn't playing an instrument when I did it, and I think eventually I would play bass for the jam and make a few dollars, and then started getting some repertoire and working. And so Curtis Scarrow played guitar, and then we had, I think, a couple of drummers. I can't remember the names.
And so you would eventually book a lot of gigs yourself, and were they booked under your name?
Well, we did the jam, right? So I don't think we even had a name as the jam, and Curtis and I never really went out and did shows together.
Host band?
Yeah, we were just the hosts for the jam. I did connect with some musicians and had a project called Barfly that was Don Griffith, Lee Kozak, Billy Watson, Ken, and I forget his last name, is a sax player, and myself, and we did some shows, and that was more of a jazz-oriented project. I also played with some of my high school friends, Roy Cydia, who played drums. I didn't go to school with Roy, but Rob Thaler, who was a piano player, and I played bass. It's so long ago, I forget names, so I apologize to my musical cohorts. Al Neufeld played trombone. So we actually, after high school, I think we still continued doing some stuff together. We'd do the occasional show at the Basement, or sometimes at Club 23 Below. I don't know if you remember that venue, and so that was primarily jazz oriented. And the same with Barfly, carried over some of the repertoire, and I would have played bass in that and sung some tunes, and there would have been some instrumentals.
Did you have any non-musical jobs?
Oh yeah.
At that time?
Yeah, I worked at Auto Tech up the street here, the gas station, as a cashier for a few years. And I did books for them a little bit at their head office up Taylor, and babysat. My mom was a duplicate bridge player, so they'd sometimes hire the kids the players to come when they had bridge tournaments to come and help caddy. I called it emptying ashtrays and moving the decks of cards. And what else? A tree planted. I was 19 or 20 when I did that, so it's later, but yeah.
So let's talk about when you finish high school. What's kind of your main focus and your direction?
And even, I should mention too, the Kistner Jazz Camp. Did you ever go to that? Do you know about it?
I think so.
Kistner Jazz Camp. So this is just, I was still in high school when I attended the camp. Every summer at Fort Capel, at Fort Sam, there was a crazy good jazz camp that went on, and they brought in clinicians from the States. Frank Mantooth, Bob Bowman. Frank Mantooth was a piano player. Bob Bowman was bass player. Scott, I want to say Hamilton. I could have the wrong name. He was a saxophone player, I believe, from New York. Those are some of the clinicians, and I think they bring in some local players too, and they would teach. And so I went there the first year for concert band, and it was about a 9 or 10 day workshop. It's awesome. Like, I mean, I think I would have probably preferred a little bit more rock and roll as a teenager, but I did learn so much in the short time I was there. They were great teachers. So I went there for 4 years. Summer music camp, I guess, sort. And then after high school, I went to university for a year, and I just took a few classes. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. For sure, I took a drama class. I took a music theory class, which was great because it gave me. It wasn't jazz oriented. It was more classical oriented, but it was still good and got me thinking musically. And then I took psychology, just to, I think, to try and figure myself out.
When you got all these initial jazz groups going, how did you pick the material? Did you guys have charts for the songs?
Well, the good old real book, right, was a great resource, and I had the vocal real book, and I had just the instrumental one, and I think we used those in high school even. I think we got copies of them. And Rob Fowler is a great pianist, and he could chart music. I think he has perfect pitch, and he would even write neat little tunes. So the guys that I played with, guys and gals, would turn me on to different artists, and so I was kind of learning on the fly, and the education was on the fly with these guys. And so
with these groups, were you the lead vocalist? Did you also play the bass?
Yeah, I with Rob and the crew from high school, I did vocals and bass and occasionally saxophone. So we'd go without a bass for a tune, and Rob might cover the bottom a bit on the piano. And I believe with Lee and Bill in the Barfly project, I played bass with that. Yeah.
What were your favorite venues to play at that time?
Yeah. Well, there weren't that many that I played at. The basement was always a treat. Just kind of a funky spot. The old basement. Yeah. Not much unlike the new basement, a little bigger there. 23 Below was always just really interesting just to get into that space.
What kind of clientele would you play for?
I think it would be a pretty folk music. Well, it depended. Like 23 Below, I think might have been almost a predecessor to kind of what I see as the Ness Creek kind of crowd. Maybe the older folks, who were probably not that old then, but and then the basement. I don't know. I see a crossover with the audiences, and I mean, I think I'm so young at the time that I'm just kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and maybe not even taking in who was actually there and listening. I just think I was just stoked and terrified too to be up there playing. I still get butterflies, and that's something that I've fortunately/unfortunately carried with me over the years.
Would you have done any original songs at this point with any of these acts?
I don't think so. I don't think I did any originals with any of those bands. I kind of got more if I did any folkier solo kind of shows. I remember opening for Stephen, actually closing. Technically, I was 18, and I closed a show for Stephen Fearing at Club 23 Below. So I would have thrown some originals in that set. Stephen had to catch a bus, so I played after him.
Okay. And so that was you, a solo act?
Yeah, that would have been me solo. And I did do occasional little shows like that around.
You deal with any things like stage fright, anything like that?
I've had a stage fright since I got started. That first jam at the Rose and Crown, and I still get nervous.
And so just talk about that for a second. It's a weird thing, because I can feel the same thing. It's just that initial, oh, you gotta do it. But then you start, and then it's like, oh yeah, whatever.
Yeah, and usually it just kind of lifts and goes, and it's all right. It's just sort of the anticipation. There's some unknowns, and there's, I guess, just wanting to do a good job. And yeah.
Okay, so now we're coming up to the 90s. So what happens next?
So, music kind of, not everything stopped, but I had a little girl that I ended up giving up for adoption when I was 19, and so I think that was the thing that might have kind of put the brakes on any sort of let's go off and pursue an education, because this is kind of a crazy, potentially super life-changing thing. And so I gave up Sarah for adoption, and then that was in fall of '89, and I stuck around Saskatoon for a year. And in that time I was working at the gas station, different auto tech location, and doing shows and connecting with people. And I waitressed for about 5 minutes at Amigo's Cantina, but in that time I was there, I ran into a performer from Calgary named Back Alley John, and John and I got chatting, and I told him I was a bass player and did occasional shows and that. And at Barfly was playing a lot at Amigos. That's another venue that I really enjoyed playing at and got a lot of mileage in. And anyway, John ended up hiring me for a show that he was doing at I believe it was Amigos initially, and he maybe had other shows. And he hired a guitar player who was living here that I had actually seen at the Blues Gardens, Tony De Teodoro. And Tony had a project called Tony D and the Wailing Damians. And his fellow guitar player was a guy named Damien Arokium. And so I'd seen them open for Colin James at the Gardens, and then John said, yeah, I've got this guitar player, Tony D, he's going to play. I'm like, oh, okay. So I forget who played drums, but we did a 4-piece, and Tony and I kind of hit it off. And so we played with John when we could, and then we worked with, maybe it was Craig Khalil, I can't remember for sure. Craig's a drummer that I think is now based in Winnipeg. He's ambidextrous. That's right, you can play both left and right. And so Tony and Craig and I worked on a trio project together and did a bunch of shows, just kind of Saskatoon. Maybe we played Regina, I can't remember exactly, but it was really fun, and really, I loved the way that Tony challenged me and how musical he was. And he also, as a teen, another artist I loved was Stevie Ray Vaughan, and Tony's guitar playing was a page out of that book, and all the people that influenced Stevie Ray Vaughan as well. So I was super happy, because it was kind of this blues mixed with this contemporary kind of classic rock sound that I really loved. And we played together, and then Tony split up, but we kept in touch, and he said, if you ever want to come, he says, I got a bunch of gigs this summer if you want to come to Ottawa. And I thought, I'm working at a gas station and I'm doing occasional gigs. I thought, why not? Let's go. So I flew out for the summer, liked it, and I ended up moving to Ottawa in the fall of '91.
And so in '92, you guys released a full-length album.
Yeah, Dig Deep.
That's the first full-length album you had ever worked on.
Yeah.
And you're the bass player.
Yeah.
The vocals.
And mandolin.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I picked up in Ottawa. I learned how to play mando a bit in Ottawa. And so we worked together for a couple of years, and then split up, but we'd still do the occasional shows. And I met a guy there, and so I ended up cleaning houses, and I ended up working at an environmental organization doing data entry, and that was it was a couple of years I did that, and played music and solo music, and then I got hired to be a bass player and vocalist with a guy named Bob Stark, who's a Saskatoon, an Ottawa singer-songwriter, and I played with him over a couple of years. And Tony and I would get together and do like an annual Christmas show, and sometimes Sue Foley would join us or other guests.
Yeah. Cool. So this is the first time you actually, by moving away from Saskatchewan, that was the first time you had played outside of Saskatchewan? Or would you have done anything?
Well, I mean, if you count the Expo 86 with the high school band, or going to Ottawa in 85, 86, we went for the national music competition. So the combo played, and the concert band I think may have played. So the high school band trips in Edmonton, I think we went on another one.
Right. Were those all done bus travel or flying?
A bit of both. I think we took a bus to Vancouver. Edmonton probably was a bus, and Ottawa would have been a flight.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're in Ontario. This is your new life. What kind of set the wheels in motion of you moving towards the career that you have today?
Well, I released my first record in '94, and through the connections I made working with Tony, I met the guy that produced my first album, Ron Soros, who was originally, he's a native Ottawan, but he lived in LA. And I met Ron through the drummer we worked with in Ottawa at the time, Mish Pulio. And Mish toured with Bruce Cockburn and played on a couple of his albums, and introduced me to Ron, and Ron would come home and visit his family in Ottawa, and just had a nice connection. He was so musical, and I just loved it. So I ended up hiring him to produce my first record. So I went down in end of '93 with my boyfriend at the time to Los Angeles, and we did pre-production down there at Ron's place, and had a little holiday at the same time, and then recorded the album in '94. And ended up releasing it in June of '94. So it was my first solo record. And
so what was the decision at that time that this was the thing to do, since you hadn't gone this direction?
How do you mean to release a solo record?
Yeah, and this is your new direction.
Well, I think the word I use a lot is possibilities. Working with Tony, we put out a record, and I kind of saw how some of the stuff was done. So it's like, well, if we did it with Tony, I mean, Tony had a bit of a team with him, and so I was basically there as a player on the record and that, but just sort of seeing the elements that are needed. So I was able to, I just felt like I can do this for myself and my own sort of.
Then you obviously are taking your songwriting quite serious at this point.
I don't know. I mean, I did more writing for sure, and but I listened back to the songs on the record, and just some things it's where I was at the time, and there were things that maybe could have been nipped and tucked, but it's a good start, and the record got played on radio. A couple of the tracks, Paul Tobin's song actually, How Come, was one of the songs that I covered on the record, and it got lots of airplay in Ottawa. So. And then there was another tune by Roy Forbes, both bluesy tunes, kind of bluesy shuffles that radio embraced. So it's funny, yeah, my sort of more songs that I wrote tended to be a little more contemporary, but it opened up doors for sure, having that record.
Do you feel like your style has been figured out, more or less, at that point? Do you feel you've shifted a lot?
I think, doing blues music at the jams in my teens, and playing with Tony, playing a lot of blues music, because our shows were pretty blues heavy. That's kind of his niche. But that was great, because it was really rocking and fun and good energy. Playing with Tony, that I would have grown a lot as a blues artist. And I eventually got invited to be the bass player in the Women's Blues Review Band, which is a show that happens every year in Toronto through the Toronto Blues Society. And they invite 6 female artists, blues artists from across Canada to come be part of the show. So they might be a musician, might be a vocalist, and so I was part of that show for many years, and oftentimes would get to sing a song at the show, like one song, and so it kind of gave me a face in the blues scene. I don't consider myself solely a blues artist, and my writing is a little all over the map. I like a lot of different styles of music, and I sort of consider singer-songwriter the music that I write, or roots. I call myself a roots and blues artist. So I haven't focused solely on blues, like, say, somebody like Sue Foley, I would consider she has reached out and done kind of different styles, but she's really quite a pure blues artist to me. So I'm still a little scattered. I'm still trying to figure out my way, but I think it's just because I love so many styles of music and grew up listening to so many styles but because I've also been embraced so much by the blues scene. I mean, I've had 22 nominations in the Maple Blues Awards and won 10 awards, and that I'm probably considered more of a blues artist. But I've had 3 Juno noms, and they've all been for different categories. One was contemporary roots solo artist. That was in 2009. That was a singer-songwriter album that Stephen Fearing produced, not a blues album. And then my trio, the Marigolds, got a Juno nom 2010. And that was a three-part harmony. And musically, it was jazz, bluegrass, country, a little bit of blues, singer-songwriter, and then the third Juno nom was for me and Mabel, which was a blues album, acoustic blues album. So
very cool. Tell us about some highlights over the years, places you've played, audiences, festivals, anything that you'd like people to be aware of.
I've felt really lucky. Back in '98, I got to do 2 different trips to play for peacekeepers. So my first overseas trip was to Bosnia to play for peacekeepers there. Tony was on that bill, and Mish Pulio, Ken Fay, Damien Arokian went on that trip as well, which was fun. And so first overseas trip to a war-torn country. So we had lots of adventures. Musically, it was a blast, but just seeing what we saw. It's a beautiful country, but also seeing the sad effects of war, like shelled out buildings and mass graves, and it's pretty intense. And then later that year, I went to Dubai to play for peacekeepers there who were guarding the border between Iraq and Iran, and they would come into Dubai to restock and do maintenance that they had to do. So we did a show for them in a hotel where in Bosnia, like, we were in towns and villages, and they'd set up a stage and make sure the area was safe from mines and things like that. That was our first thing in Bosnia, was a mine debriefing, where to go, where not to go. So Dubai was a bit different, and it was more of a cultural trip. So playing for peacekeepers there and getting to go see that part of the world. So those are a couple of kind of cool things. And been to China. I mean, music has taken me all over. I played in China in 2007 for a Maple Rhythm tour, and that was with one of my other projects called Vinnick Shepherd Heart. So we went over, and there were other entertainers there as well. I can't remember the names right now. But we did kind of I don't think we all did a show. We might have done one show together, but where else? I've been all over the States. I opened for John Hammond in New York City. John Hammond Jr. back in, I think that was around 2010. That was my first New York show in Madison Square Park Conservancy. So it was a beautiful park, and opening for John and meeting his wife Marla, and chatting with them. John had a lot of connections in Ottawa, and I was in Ottawa from 91 to 98, and then I moved to Toronto. But so we knew a lot of people in common, so it was kind of nice. It was kind of an old home time, because New York is a pretty big and daunting city, but it made it small. Those are a few. I mean, there's taught in Germany. I did a Women in Emotion festival in Germany. Played in France back in 2006 for this Le Grand Dame de Blues series that presenter out of Montreal, Brian Slack, put together. So there was myself and a troupe of entertainers doing a blues show, if we focus on women in the blues. Just kind of walking through. I was in Ireland, but that was more of a personal trip. I played music with a friend of mine, and we didn't play Irish music, we just played, they wanted contemporary music, so it was great. It's pretty cool, I mean, getting to travel the world and see places, and music is a great communicator, you know, people, almost everyone loves music, and so it's a nice way to get to connect with people.
Do you have looking back at everything you've done, is there a special moment, something that you just go, it was all worth it
for that?
Some songs, some experience?
You know, I there's sometimes things will happen or come up, and I'll feel like, well, if I died tomorrow, you know, that'd be okay. And I've had a few things like that have happened to me where blessings have come along. I mean, getting my first Juno nomination was a real treat, and an honor. And then getting the second one, and then getting the third one. I mean, it was like those sort of things where you're acknowledged by your peers and what you're doing is all right, and the fact that I'm making a living at music, which it's challenging being self-employed and having to constantly hunt for work, and I'm forever behind on all the paperwork I have to do. It's sort of, I'm hoping I get caught up, and I hope that it doesn't kill me, or I get caught up before I die, or whatever, I don't know. But I don't know if there's any one particular thing. I just feel like I'm really blessed that this is what I do. Yeah. I get to create, and I can kind of put the brakes on for a few days here and there, and stop and see some family, like I did recently. I was in BC and just got time to just go for some hikes and make a little holiday out of the time in between the shows I had, and not worry about gigs. And I've also gotten to do these really awesome tours through Home Roots organization out of Manitoba, and they've lined up these house concert tours that you might have 12 to 14 gigs in a period of 2 weeks or 2 weeks and a bit, and you get to seeing places that you wouldn't get to see, small towns. I've traveled through southern Manitoba, some northern parts of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, and the Northern Highway, like to Prince Rupert, and seeing parts of the country that if you worked a 9-to-5 job, you would not get to see. I've gone to Iqaluit. That was actually pretty special too. Seeing the tundra, and the light is so different up there, and Whitehorse and Yellowknife. It's all kind of a blessing.
Yeah. Do you have any major goals that you still want to tackle in the future?
Well, there's instruments I'd like to learn more on and try to incorporate in my show. I want to do something that I'm hoping to go to Ukraine, which is my family heritage, and just spend some time. It may or may not end up being a musical thing, but just finding out a bit more about my roots of my family, and seeing if I can connect with family there. So there may be like a Ukrainian, who knows what it'll end up being musically, but something that, because I've sung Ukrainian a bit over the years. I don't speak the language, but But that's sort of like my bucket list, is to learn Ukrainian, French, Spanish, see the Foo Fighters in concert, because I haven't seen them yet. I love them. And get over to Europe more as an artist. I haven't played there much, so it's looking like there may be some possibilities in 2020 to get there, and just to maybe be able to work just a little bit less but still get by okay, because I know as you get older, the travel might be a little more challenging physically, but
Right.
yeah.
Let's talk about an award in Saskatoon.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel here today?
Well, honestly, I've called them dinosaur-sized butterflies for weeks now, today especially. Though now that I've done the rehearsals and that for the big show, I feel a lot better. But yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I mean, the first time I played the Sask Jazz Fest was through a contest that happened at Bud's, and I played there as a 19-year-old, 7.5-month pregnant teenager, my birth daughter, and with my pals J.B. Eckel and Hal Carroll and Malcolm Travis. We had a project we had that we played some shows called the Blues Unit, and so it's pretty trippy 30 years later that to be receiving the special recognition award for the festival, and at the festival, and getting up on it's probably not the exact same stage, but same location, and making some music in the park. It's be pretty sweet.
Pretty cool, eh?
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. It's pretty special.
Well, good luck with that. You know, you're gonna have a great show tonight here in Saskatoon, and
Yeah.
it's, congratulations on all your successes.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for going back and telling us everything.
Yeah, hopefully I probably missed a bunch of the everything, but we'll do what we can remember today. But thanks, Terry.
Thank you.